Imagine an era when enormous forests covered most of Europe and paved roads were nearly non-existent. In this setting, brave peoples spread across territories ranging from Gaul, modern-day France, to the British Isles and the Iberian Peninsula. Among these peoples, the Celts stood out, famous for their bravery in battle, but also for a charming culture rich in spiritual rituals. On the other hand, the Roman Empire was rapidly expanding, crushing entire civilizations and transforming the political and social landscape of the ancient world. On this journey back in time, we will explore how these two forces collided in an impressive manner, leaving deep marks in history. We will unveil secrets, meet legendary leaders, and understand why the Celts were so important in shaping the borders of Europe. The story you are about to hear is rich in decisive moments, epic battles, conquests, resistances, and above all, a deep passion for freedom and autonomy. So, get ready to discover how Julius Caesar, the ambitious Roman general and statesman, faced Celtic leaders like Vercingetorix, and how years later, another name would rise to fame by resisting in the insular north of the Roman world, the warrior queen Boudica. You will learn how each of them was crucial in defining strategies, inspiring their people, and challenging the might of Rome. But before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're subscribed to our channel and hit the notification bell, so you won't miss any of our videos filled with historical curiosities about the ancient world. Do you know that the origin of the Celts is as ancient as some of the classical civilizations, yet still carries enigmas that intrigue historians to this day? The foundation of a mysterious culture. Celtic history begins in Central Europe, in a region that mainly corresponded to southern Germany and Austria around 1200 BC. These primitive peoples, known for their skills in working with metals, developed a culture marked by the production of weapons, utensils, and jewelry, all crafted to be as beautiful as they were functional. This initial period, often associated with the Hallstatt culture, was fundamental in shaping the Celtic traditions that would flourish centuries later. In this environment, families and clans organized themselves into small agricultural communities and lived close to nature. Each tribe had its own leader, but what truly united all the Celts was the Celtic language, divided into different dialects, and a set of beliefs that revered rivers, forests, and natural elements as sacred entities. There was no unified Celtic nation, but rather diverse, independent tribes that shared similar customs and rites. Over time, these tribes expanded in search of fertile lands and trade opportunities, reaching the Iberian Peninsula, France, the British Isles, and even northern Italy. This process of expansion gave the Celts an advantage: access to new trade routes for goods and ideas, which further enriched their culture. However, they also began to come into contact with powerful peoples, such as the Etruscans and, later, the Romans. It is within this context of the growing Celtic presence that pagan culture and rites began to strengthen. Druids, the priests responsible for maintaining oral traditions and the spiritual connection with the land, became central figures. Thus, the seed of a great civilization was sown, ready to flourish across countless territories. But how would these peoples react in the face of the Roman Empire, which was advancing fiercely across Europe? While the Celts expanded their territory, another force was emerging at a rapid pace: Rome. What clash of giants could arise from this encounter? Rapid growth and the first conflicts. With the transition to the so-called Latin culture around 500 BC, the Celts reached an artistic and military peak. Their weapons became more sophisticated, and their cultural expressions, such as jewelry and adornments, became known throughout Europe. The Celtic warrior elite began to display richly decorated swords, intricately worked metal helmets, and ornate shields, symbolizing status and power. During this same period, Rome, a city-state, was transforming into an expansionist republic. Its disciplined armies and political organization gave it an advantage over many peoples, but they had not yet encountered enemies as fierce as the Celts. The first serious clash came in 390 BC, when the Celtic tribe of the Senones, led by Breno, invaded and sacked the city of Rome, an act that instilled fear in the hearts of the Romans. The sacking of Rome by the Celts created a dark legend about the danger they represented. Rome would never forget the humiliation it suffered, and while the Celts stood out for their courage and independence, they had now awakened the enmity of an adversary that would grow to become the greatest empire in the Western world. This clash was not to be the last. In the following centuries, tensions between Celtic tribes and Rome only increased. While the Celts strengthened their own trade routes and alliances, Rome honed its legions and expanded its borders. It was clear that a confrontation of epic proportions was being prepared. But to reach the pinnacle of this conflict, we need to meet a fundamental character. Julius Caesar, the young Roman general, was about to leave his mark on history. But to what extent would his ambition change the destiny of both the Celts and Rome? The rise of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was a man of noble bearing, born into a patrician family. From an early age, he demonstrated political talent and strategic skill. His eloquence was crucial for winning followers and forging alliances that would place him in prominent positions in the Senate. Ambitious, he envisioned the expansion of Rome as a way to etch his name into eternity. Upon assuming command of border provinces, Caesar came into direct contact with the Celtic tribes of Gaul, a region that today largely corresponds to France. There, he realized that Gaul was not completely unified, but rather divided among multiple tribes, some of which were rivals. And in that division, he saw an opportunity. If he could subjugate them, he could bring great wealth to Rome and consolidate his political position. Caesar's campaign in Gaul was marked by cunning. He exploited internal Celtic rivalries, forming temporary alliances with some tribes to defeat others. At the same time, his legionaries instilled terror with their military superiority and discipline. In his famous work, Commentaries on the Gallic War, he recounts the victories he amassed, largely omitting the atrocities committed and the suffering of local populations. It was in this context that Caesar would encounter a rival equal to him, Vercingetorix, a young Celtic leader capable of uniting rival tribes to resist Roman domination. The emergence of this leader would mark the moment when Gaul unified its efforts to avoid becoming just another trophy in Julius Caesar's military resume. How could one man unite so many scattered and rival peoples to confront the devastating power of Rome? Vercingetorix and the union of the tribes. Vercingetorix was not only an exceptional warrior, but also a visionary. Tall, muscular, with long hair and ever-alert eyes, he bore on his face the determination of someone willing to sacrifice everything for the freedom of his people. Recognizing the threat that Rome posed, he convinced various tribes to join forces with a common goal: to expel the Roman legions from Gaul. Vercingetorix's leadership was based on charisma and negotiation skills. He forged agreements among Celtic groups that had historically been at odds, reminding them that they could only survive if they acted as a cohesive army. The Druids, who wielded significant spiritual influence, also supported this initiative, believing that unity was the will of the gods to preserve Celtic identity. When the rebellion reached its peak, Vercingetorix and his troops inflicted significant defeats on the Romans, employing guerrilla tactics and surprise attacks on terrains unfamiliar to the legions. Realizing that Caesar had a weak point in his supply logistics, the Celtic leader adopted a scorched earth strategy. He destroyed crops and villages so that the enemy could not resupply. This move, though controversial, demonstrated his pragmatism. In times of war, however, the decisive victory was still distant. Under pressure, Caesar used all his military genius to plan a counteroffensive. The ultimate confrontation would soon take place at Alesia, surrounded by tension and destined to be forever etched in the annals of history. The fate of Gaul and Rome would intersect in a single battle. Who would emerge victorious from this epic clash? The Battle of Alesia. Alesia became the stage where Vercingetorix and Caesar clashed with all their might. The Celtic army, numerous and well-prepared, occupied a strong position on a hilltop surrounded by makeshift walls. However, what Vercingetorix did not expect was Caesar's skill in completely encircling that fortress, constructing ditches, palisades, and an entire line of fortifications to isolate the Celts. The determination of both sides was immeasurable. The Celts attempted to break the siege several times, but the Roman defenses were nearly impregnable. Without supplies and unable to gain external support, the morale within the walls began to falter. Still, Vercingetorix, with his imposing presence and courage, inspired his men to keep fighting. When the Celtic relief army finally arrived to aid the fortress at Alesia, one of the most dramatic battles of the period unfolded. Attacks from both inside and outside the siege. However, Roman discipline and Caesar's genius prevailed. The siege remained intact, and hunger began to haunt the Gallic defenders. With no alternatives left, Vercingetorix surrendered to save his people, handing himself over to Caesar and sealing the fate of all Gaul. This moment defined the peak of Julius Caesar's military career and marked the beginning of the Romanization of the Celtic tribes in Gaul. Have you ever wondered how this event shaped the destiny of an empire? Hit that like button now so we can continue bringing you stories as impactful as this. While Gaul was succumbing, a new center of rebellion was emerging in the Northern Isles, led by a fearless queen. The resistance in the Isles. Boudica enters the scene. Although Caesar had conquered Gaul, there was one territory where resistance still shone brightly: Britannia. It was a region composed of several Celtic tribes living in relative freedom until the arrival of the Roman army. And at the center of this storm emerged the figure of Boudica, a queen with long red hair and a piercing gaze. Boudica ruled the Iceni tribe alongside her husband, Brasutagus, who had established a tenuous alliance with Rome. However, after his death, the Romans confiscated lands and goods, as well as publicly humiliating the queen and her daughters. Boudica's anger knew no bounds, uniting neighboring tribes in the quest for justice and freedom. The revolt led by Boudica was one of the most violent and symbolic in Britannia. Her troops destroyed Roman cities such as Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester, and challenged the legions with admirable fury. The queen rode in a chariot, with impassioned speeches on her lips, calling the people to battle. Her presence inspired courage and bolstered the myth of an invincible warrior woman. However, after a series of triumphs, Boudica's army eventually faced a better organized Roman legion. In a definitive battle, the Romans emerged victorious thanks to their disciplined formation and greater battlefield experience. Boudica, whose legend spread quickly, left behind a legacy of strength and resistance that has endured for centuries. Rome thought it had everything under control, but the northern tribes continued to boil with revolt. How could this impasse be resolved? Walls and borders. Hadrian's barrier. With most of Britannia subdued, Rome believed that complete pacification would be swift. But even fiercer tribes inhabited the region that is now Scotland. These Celts, known as the Picts, were formidable. Warriors who made any further Roman advance to the north extremely difficult. Unable to keep them under control, Rome opted for a defensive strategy. Thus, Hadrian's Wall was born. Commissioned by Emperor Hadrian around 122 AD. This barrier, made of stone and watchtowers, marked the northern limit of the Roman Empire. On the island, the structure impressed not only by its extent, but also by its imposing nature, symbolizing the point where Rome decided that the cost of expansion was not worth the risk. The frontier became a stage for sporadic conflicts, as the Picts constantly tested Roman vigilance. However, the wall also brought some stability, as it established clear boundaries and forced a more peaceful coexistence between the Romans and the local Celts. This period of relative calm allowed Celtic culture to persist in lands further north. Still, it is important to note that the construction of the wall did not mark the end of Celtic influence. On the contrary, Celtic traditions remained alive and were even strengthened, especially in Ireland and in the Brittonic regions, that Rome could not fully control. If the Roman expansion reached so many places, what would have happened on the mysterious island of Ireland? Ireland and the preservation of Celtic heritage. For Rome, Ireland represented a distant and little-known territory, with no accessible roads and no evident great riches to spark Roman greed. The island was largely left in peace. It was there that Celtic culture found a safe refuge, far from the Roman legions and the impositions of the empire. With its fertile soil and rich oral tradition, the Irish tribes kept ancient Celtic rituals alive, passing down myths, songs, and poems from generation to generation. The Druids preserved much of the ancestral knowledge, maintaining festivals such as Samhain, which marked the changing of the seasons and the close connection with the spiritual world. When Christianity finally arrived in Ireland, around the 5th century AD, it did not eradicate Celtic culture, rather it intertwined with it. Missionaries like St. Patrick adopted a conciliatory approach, incorporating Celtic symbols and festivities into the new faith. This syncretism resulted in works such as the Book of Kells, an illuminated manuscript that expresses Celtic art blended with Christian themes. Thus Ireland became the great centre for preserving Celtic traditions, largely thanks to having escaped direct Roman control. While other regions underwent strong Romanization, the Emerald Isle safeguarded in its records and in the memory of its people the essence of ancient Celtic beliefs and rituals. Have you ever imagined that many of our modern celebrations could have roots so ancient and profound? The living legacy, Samhain and Halloween. The Samhain festival is probably one of the most iconic examples of the Celtic heritage that has transcended the centuries. Marked on the night of October 31st to November 1st, this period symbolized the end of the harvest and the beginning of winter. According to tradition, the veil between the world of the living and the dead became thinner, facilitating contact between the two. In Celtic communities, huge bonfires were lit to ward off evil spirits and protect the villages. People wore masks and costumes to camouflage themselves from the threatening beings that might cross this portal between worlds. It was a time to honor ancestors and celebrate the renewal that winter would bring, a period also considered one of spiritual introspection. With the expansion of Christianity, All Saints' Day was established on November 1st, and the Samhain festival was adapted into church celebrations. Many centuries later, the tradition was reinterpreted, especially in Anglo-Saxon culture, giving rise to modern Halloween, with costumes, trick-or-treating, and the famous carved pumpkin lantern. Thus, every time we celebrate Halloween, we are, in part, commemorating the ancient Celtic festivals and their unique way of viewing the relationship between the natural and the supernatural. It serves as a reminder that the heritage of these peoples remains alive in our contemporary culture, far beyond the battles and conquests that marked their past. And after all, what remains from this entire journey? Let's now discover the eternal impact that the Celts left on our history. A story that never fades. Centuries later, when the Roman Empire crumbled, much of the Celtic heritage had already merged with Roman and Christian customs in many regions. The Celtic language weakened in some areas, while in others, its dialects remain alive to this day, such as Welsh, Irish Gaelic, and Scottish Gaelic. However, The stories and legends, transmitted through songs and manuscripts, preserved the essence of this warrior and spiritual culture. Figures like Vercingetorix, who dared to resist Roman domination, and Boudica, the queen who ignited an unforgettable rebellion, are remembered for their courage and leadership. They became symbols of the struggle for independence and inspired nationalist movements in different eras. Their images appear in monuments, films, books, and now also in video that connect us to their ancestral history. Today, we see the of Celtic legacy in traditional music festivals, folk celebrations, and in the perpetuation of myths and legends that lead us into a realm where the mystical and the real intertwine. It is this legacy that continues to captivate researchers, artists, and ordinary people who seek to understand the depth of a culture that never allowed itself to be completely erased. Every time we are a Celtic warrior or light a Halloween bonfire, we are in some way connected to a history that dates back millennia. And if you've made it this far, you can be sure that the Celts, with all their strength, spirituality, and determination, hold a special place on the grand stage of human history. And thus, we come to the end of our grand journey through the history of the Celts and their tumultuous but also fascinating relationship with the Roman Empire. We have met legendary warriors, witnessed epic battles, celebrated ancient festivals, and seen how Celtic culture intertwined with our modern reality. It is impressive such ancient stories still resonate today, influencing traditions, beliefs, and even the celebrations we observe annually. If you enjoyed this journey through time and want more fascinating stories, subscribe to the channel, hit that like button, and share this video with your friends. Leave a comment below. Which fact caught your attention in this incredible history of the Celts? Or what else would you like to know about the ancient world? Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you in the next video as we continue exploring the mysteries and curiosities of the Roman world and beyond.